Those who left a job and watched the place self-destruct afterward, what fell apart first? I used to work at a mid-sized marketing agency that everyone in the industry quietly referred to as the blender because it chewed you up and spat you out. But I stayed for 4 years because I was stubborn, desperate to prove myself, and honestly, I liked the chaos. Or maybe I was numb to it. Hard to tell now. What I didn't like was my boss. Daniel, if you took a motivational poster, wrung the positivity out of it, and replaced it with rage issues and insecurity, you'd get him. He had this way of making every problem someone else's fault. Printer jam, my fault. Client pulled a contract, obviously my fault. Someone else messed up a campaign timeline, definitely my fault, but also I was too controlling. So somehow it was a double sin. I didn't even realize how warped it all was until I ended up crying in my car during lunch one day because he accused me of undermining morale by typing too loud. Yes, typing too loud. I hit a breaking point during a major account project. I'd run the entire campaign fixed. Everyone's mistakes handled the client personally and basically held the team together with duct tape and caffeine. And then in the final presentation, Daniel credited himself for everything and told the CEO I'd supported him. I swear if I could have bottled the rage I felt in that moment, I could have powered the building, so I quit. No notice. No long goodbye email, just dropped my badge on the HR desk and walked out. They didn't even try to stop me. A few coworkers texted me later saying Daniel told everyone I was emotionally unstable and couldn't handle pressure, which honestly made me laugh. At that point, it was like he was reading from the narcissist's manual. Anyway, the collapse. It started within 5 days. The client I had managed, the giant account Daniel had bragged about securing. They called the CEO demanding to speak to me. When he said I'd left, they asked, "Who's handling our campaigns now?" The answer was no one. Daniel had never actually learned anything about the project because he was too busy yelling at interns and glaring at my spreadsheets like they personally offended him. The client pulled the contract immediately, $500,000 gone. Then the designers revolted. Turns out Daniel had been checking over their work and making random changes that broke the design rules, then blaming them when the client complained. Without me shielding them and fixing things quietly, they stopped trying. One walked out midday, another emailed at 2 a.m. saying I'm done and never came back. Week 3, HR found out Daniel was approving overtime without logging it and promising bonuses that didn't exist. That opened a whole can of legal worms. I heard later that HR tried to investigate, but Daniel screamed at them and locked himself in his office like a petulant toddler who'd been told to share his toys. Week 5, the CEO stepped in. By then, 2 clients had left, 3 employees quit, and one broke down crying in the kitchen because she was working 70-hour weeks to cover the chaos. And then came the moment I still think about when I'm lying in bed at night trying not to grin like an idiot. Daniel got fired, publicly, loudly, dramatically. They walked him out while the whole office watched. One of my former coworkers said it was like watching a dictator finally get overthrown. But the best part, the CEO told the entire staff verbatim. This collapse began the moment we allowed a toxic manager to push out our best employee. My phone lit up all day with messages like, "Oh my God, you should have seen his face." We all applauded when the elevator doors closed. Dude, you were the foundation. When you left the building, the whole thing tilted. The agency never fully recovered. They downsized, lost more clients, and basically faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, I found a new job within a month. One that treated me like an actual human being instead of a scapegoat vending machine. And every time imposter syndrome tries to creep back in, I remind myself they claimed I was too emotional. Turns out I was the only thing keeping their mess of a company alive. And the moment I stopped holding it together, their whole world fell apart. I used to work as the night shift lead at a small manufacturing plant that ran more like a poorly organized family than an actual business. You know the type. Everyone was weirdly loyal despite being exhausted, underpaid, and constantly cleaning up the owner's impulsive decisions. That owner was Marlon, a man who believed yelling was a leadership style and safety regulations were suggestions, not rules. I stayed for 7 years. 7. I still don't know if that makes me loyal or just chronically bad at boundaries. But the night shift crew was basically my second family, a bunch of misfits who relied on the steady routine I kept running. I managed inventory, machine rotations, training scheduling, and all the crisis control that Marlon avoided by simply not being there after 3 p.m. The problem, Marlon decided that because things were running smoothly, he must be the reason. Not the crew, not the systems I built, not the literal notebooks I created filled with color-coded safety notes. Nope. Him's strong leadership, he'd say, patting himself on the stomach like he'd won a prize. So naturally, he promoted his nephew Kyle to co-lead the night shift. Not because Kyle had experience, he didn't. Not because Kyle wanted the job, he didn't. But because Kyle once said, "Uncle Marlon, you work harder than anyone here." And Marlon practically melted. Kyle's leadership style consisted of vaping indoors, ignoring alarms, and telling the new hires, "Dude, just wing it." He also kept messing with the machines so he could optimize them, which is how he caused 3 shutdowns in 1 week. I fixed everything quietly, but Marlon thought Kyle was innovative. I knew I needed to leave when Kyle tried to rewrite my safety checklist by replacing every detailed instruction with, "Just be careful, bro." I gave my 2-week notice. Marlon acted like I'd betrayed him. Kyle told me he'd step up as alpha male now, which was confusing because it's a warehouse, not a wolf pack. I wish I could say I felt guilty leaving. I didn't. Not even a little now for the collapse week 1. The first domino, I was barely out the door when the night crew texted me saying Kyle announced he was streamlining operations. His streamlining involved skipping machine warm-ups, waste of time, ignoring the safety lockout, overkill, reassigning people randomly because variety is good for the brain. By Wednesday, one of the hydraulic presses overheated and shut down. Kyle blamed the crew. The crew blamed Kyle. Marlon blamed me somehow. This wouldn't happen if you hadn't quit during our busiest season. Right, because I was secretly controlling the plant with my mind. Week 2. The exodus begins. 3 people quit. They were tired of picking up Kyle's slack and being yelled at whenever something broke. The remaining workers were pulling double shifts. And morale dropped so fast, it practically dug a hole in the floor. Kyle tried giving a motivational speech, but accidentally insulted everyone, saying they needed to man up and stop whining about the heat. It was January. The building wasn't heated. Kyle had turned the heater off to save money. Week 3 safety incident. Someone got injured. Nothing life-threatening, thank God, but enough to bring OSHA into the mix. And the investigator quickly realized 3 things. The safety logs hadn't been filled out since I left. Machines were being run outside their approved specs. Kyle told OSHA, "Yeah, but rules are like guidelines, right?" OSHA politely disagreed. Week 4. The avalanche with the fines ramping up. Marlon panicked, but his bright idea was to demand everyone work faster to make up the loss. Spoiler: that's not how anything works. Machines started breaking down daily, orders got delayed, clients started calling. Kyle hid in the office and pretended to be on the phone anytime someone looked stressed. One client, the biggest one the plant depended on, sent an inspector. The inspector asked, "Who ran this machine last?" Kyle proudly said, "Me." Why? They pulled the contract a day later. Week 5. The implosion. Half the staff walked out. The other half stayed only because they needed a paycheck. Production was down 70%. Kyle started crying on shift. Marlon screamed at everyone except the one person responsible. Then the plant had a full shutdown. Multiple machines broke simultaneously because Kyle had been disabling error messages. They beep too much. The CEO of the parent company, who had never visited before, showed up furious. The staff said in unison. This all started when they replaced the night lead. Marlon finally tried to throw Kyle under the bus, but the CEO said something that made my year. The only reason this place didn't collapse sooner is because your former lead was compensating for you. The second she left, the truth surfaced. Kyle was fired on the spot. Marlon was relieved of duties a week later. The plant reopened under new management with strict oversight and a long list of required repairs. And me, I had already found a new job, better pay, better hours, and nobody screaming about my checklists. They actually loved my organizational systems. And sometimes late at night, I think about how everyone told Marlon, the place will fall apart without her. And he smirked like that was impossible. Turns out it took exactly 3 weeks. I used to manage a little family-owned restaurant that everyone in town loved because it felt homey-like, the kind of place where the waitresses knew your kids' names and the cook slipped extra fries onto the plate when he liked you. But behind the scenes, we were one power outage away from absolute disaster. The owners, Margaret and Tom, were married, but the only thing keeping that marriage together was passive-aggressive whisper fighting and separate bank accounts. I honestly think the restaurant was their child, except the kind they resented but couldn't abandon. I stayed for 5 years, ran the front of house, organized schedules, managed vendors, trained staff, solved fights, negotiated with drunk regulars at 10 p.m. when they wanted just one more beer. Basically, I kept the ship floating while Margaret and Tom bickered in the back office about whether to raise menu prices by 50 cents. Things started to unravel when they decided to hire their son, Dylan, as my assistant manager. And by assistant manager, I mean, he showed up late, took 2-hour bathroom breaks, ate food straight from the walk-in, hit on every woman who came in, including teenagers, and once tried to pay a vendor with expired gift cards. As a joke, I brought all of this up to Margaret and Tom. Their response, "Oh, he's still growing." The man was 28. I started documenting everything just to protect myself. But it didn't matter because one day Dylan walked in hungover, saw the packed dining room, sighed dramatically and said, "I'm not doing this today." And he quit. On the spot. Except his parents didn't want him to be a quitter. So they told him to stay and told me to correct my leadership style so he feels supported. That was the exact moment I mentally checked out. I gave them 4 weeks notice only because I cared about the staff and didn't want to leave them hanging. Margaret cried. Tom tried to bargain with me. Dylan shrugged and asked if he could have my shift key. I left on a Friday. The weekend crowd hugged me goodbye. The cooks threw me a little party with a cake that said, "Good luck, we're screwed." They were right. Here's how it fell apart. Week 1. Dylan tries to be the boss. I swear I could hear the collective groan from across town. He immediately cut everyone's hours to keep payroll tight, but then stayed clocked in for 60 hours himself so he'd look like a hero. Forgot to place the weekly food order so the cooks had no onions, no chicken, no lettuce, and no ketchup by Wednesday. Deleted the employee group chat because too many notifications, which meant nobody knew when they were scheduled anymore. 3 servers quit. 1 cook threatened to walk out mid-shift because Dylan told him, "Just improvise," when they ran out of mozzarella. Week 2. The sickening smell. I got a text from one of the servers saying the walk-in smelled like death and vinegar. Turns out Dylan turned down the fridge temperature to save electricity and spoiled a week's worth of food, thousands of dollars gone. Dylan told customers they'd changed the menu to be more modern. Customers told Google reviews they were never coming back. Week 3, health inspector surprise. Someone, probably a disgruntled former server, called the health department. They arrived unannounced. Do you know what the inspector found? Raw chicken stored above salad greens, mold in the ice machine, mouse droppings behind the bar, Dylan smoking a vape in the kitchen. They failed hard. The restaurant got a partial shutdown. Margaret cried in the parking lot. Tom blamed the young generation. Dylan posted on Facebook that haters are jealous of a successful king. Week 4. Financial collapse. Without me handling invoices, vendor relationships, menu costing, and scheduling, everything spiraled. Vendors demanded payment before delivery. Deliveries were late. Staff stopped showing up because checks bounced. Customers were complaining nonstop about slow service and missing items. One night they had 1 server and 0 line cooks. Dylan tried to cook himself. The fire alarm said no. Week 6, the end of the line. A server sent me a video. It was Dylan arguing with a customer, telling him if he didn't like waiting 45 minutes for fries, he could go eat at a gas station. The customer threw his drink at him. Dylan called the police. The police told him to grow up 2 days later. The restaurant closed temporarily to reorganize. It never reopened. And here's the part that gets me. The community blamed the owners, but not for hiring Dylan, for not valuing the staff that actually kept the place running. People still tell me, it hasn't been the same since you left. Some say the atmosphere lost its heartbeat. Others say the food lost its soul. But the cooks, they say it plainly, you were the glue. The second you walked out, the whole thing slid off the wall. And honestly, I believe them not because I was perfect, but because I was the only one actually trying. I worked at a law firm for almost 6 years. Not as a lawyer, I was one of those invisible gears in the machinery, administrative assistant, scheduler, gatekeeper, emotional buffer, you name it. I was the person who reminded lawyers where they were supposed to be, what documents were missing, which deadlines would get them in trouble, and in subtle ways who kept their egos from eating the office alive. The partners. Let's just say they were brilliant, but self-absorbed. If the building collapsed tomorrow, they'd probably send a memo apologizing to the walls for the inconvenience I stayed because I liked the structure, the challenges, and honestly because I thought I was irreplaceable. The breaking point came with one particular partner, a guy named Patrick. Patrick was everything the stereotype says about lawyers: sharp, cunning, persuasive, and utterly incapable of recognizing anyone else's effort. He would schedule meetings he never attended, then blame someone for missing them. He would delegate projects and then act shocked when deadlines weren't met. He had a way of smiling like he was solving a puzzle while he was quietly undermining everyone around him. I warned him politely, repeatedly, that if certain procedures weren't followed, clients would start noticing mistakes. He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Don't worry, people like you overthink things." I left. 2 weeks' notice. No fanfare, no dramatic confrontation. I just walked out. The collapse started almost immediately. Within days, the first domino fell. The firm's biggest client, the one who paid for more than half of our office's revenue, called to complain that documents had been filed incorrectly. The junior lawyers left without anyone reminding them of deadlines and proper procedures were panicked. Patrick tried to reassure them, but his version of reassurance was to criticize them publicly and insist they figure it out. Then the interns started quitting. The work was piling up. Files were missing. Clients who once thought the firm was flawless were now questioning everything. And Patrick, he was floundering. He didn't know how to organize anything without someone constantly telling him what he forgot. By the 3rd week, the office was a mess. Court filings were late. Contracts were unsigned. The receptionist had no idea which client to call for what. And Patrick was blaming everyone except himself. He shouted at associates, snapped at support staff, and even started taking out his frustration on clients during calls, which is how you lose people faster than you realize. Then came the real kicker. Patrick decided to micromanage the office himself, which was like handing a bull a china shop and saying, "Good luck." Files were misfiled. Checks bounced. One paralegal literally fainted from stress because Patrick had given conflicting instructions on the same case to 3 different people. A week later, a partner from another branch of the firm called in shock. "What's happening at your office? We've received 5 complaints this morning alone." The rumor mill, which had been dormant for years because of my careful management, had spun into full force. The clients were discussing terminating contracts. By week 6, Patrick was isolated. He had no one to rely on. People who once called him brilliant now avoided him. The staff morale was at 0. 2 more lawyers quit. The receptionist resigned. And the paralegal who had fainted was on medical leave. I heard about it all through former colleagues who texted me saying, "It's chaos without you," and "You should see Patrick trying to organize a meeting. He's yelling at himself in the mirror now." The firm eventually had to bring in an outside consultant to reorganize everything, but the damage was done. Major clients left. Some staff never returned. Patrick was humiliated, publicly criticized, and stripped of leadership responsibilities, and me, I had already started my new job in a smaller firm where my contributions were valued, my voice heard, and no one tried to make me the invisible glue that holds everything together while taking all the blame. The takeaway: sometimes being the person everyone depends on makes you invisible until you're gone, and when you finally leave, the world you kept from falling apart finally shows its cracks. I was one of the first employees at a tiny tech startup that promised to revolutionize online education. When I joined, it was just 3 people in a garage, 2 coders and a founder who didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a lemonade stand. I managed operations, investor relations, customer support, and basically became the human glue holding the company together. Over 3 years, I built processes, automated support systems, negotiated deals with early clients, and organized workflows so the company could handle growth. The coders were brilliant at tech but oblivious to anything else. And the founder was brilliant at pitching but clueless about running a business. I was the one preventing him from bankrupting us with wild promises and mismanaged funds. I finally left after a toxic year where he started blaming me for everything that went wrong, despite my hard work. 2 weeks after I walked out, the first signs of chaos appeared: unpaid invoices, angry clients, and bugs going unaddressed. The coders tried to manage operations themselves, but no one knew who was responsible for what. By the end of the month, investors were threatening to pull out. Employees were quitting faster than the founder could process resignation emails. The CEO held an all-hands meeting to fix everything, and during it, accidentally revealed a critical security flaw that had gone unnoticed because I had implemented a system to prevent exactly that. Clients immediately canceled contracts. 6 weeks later, the startup filed for bankruptcy. The founder later admitted to me that he hadn't realized how much I had been doing behind the scenes until the moment I left. The worst part? They had no idea how much time and energy I had poured into keeping the company alive. I moved on to a larger, established company. Watching them implode without me was oddly satisfying, but also terrifying. I realized just how invisible effort can be and how fragile things are when the person holding them together disappears. I worked at a small nonprofit that helped underprivileged youth get access to educational resources. I wasn't the director, but I basically did everything that kept the place functional: managed volunteers, grant applications, community partnerships, and the daily operations. The founder had a big heart but was completely disorganized. Without me, deadlines were missed, volunteers stopped showing up, and donors began questioning where their money was going. I gave my notice quietly because I had accepted a better-paying role elsewhere, hoping my departure wouldn't create chaos. I underestimated how much they relied on me. Within a week of my leaving, 2 grant applications were submitted late. Donors didn't get updates. A volunteer coordinator resigned because she couldn't handle the chaos, and the founder was left trying to do everything alone. By week 3, the nonprofit lost funding from 3 major donors, which forced them to cut staff and programs. I kept hearing rumors through mutual friends: workshops canceled, youth programs suspended, volunteers confused. The founder called me weeks later, desperate for advice, but I had already stepped away. I realized then that sometimes the people you save, intentionally or not, are the ones who can't manage without you, and the world doesn't wait for them to catch up. I worked at a mid-sized boutique hotel as the operations manager. The hotel had about 50 rooms and ran 24/7. The owner was the type of person who thought charisma could replace systems. Guests loved the aesthetic, but behind the scenes, everything was held together by me. Scheduling, housekeeping, maintenance calls, booking oversight, staff training, conflict resolution, you name it. The owner hired a new operations manager and decided they didn't need me anymore. I left quietly, knowing the new hire had 0 experience. Within days, reservations got double booked, housekeeping schedules collapsed, and maintenance issues went unresolved. Guests complained, online reviews tanked, staff quit mid-shift because of the confusion. By the end of the month, the hotel was operating at half capacity, and revenue had dropped by 60%. The new manager resigned after 3 weeks, overwhelmed. The owner called me frantically asking if I would return. I declined politely, watching as the hotel limped along and eventually lost its reputation. There's something almost poetic about it. The second I removed myself from the system, the cracks appeared. It wasn't revenge. It was just the natural consequence of being the only person keeping everything together. I worked as the administrative head at a private middle school. My job was mostly invisible, coordinating teachers, managing records, handling parent complaints, scheduling classes, ensuring compliance with state regulations. The principal relied entirely on me to maintain the daily operation, but students, parents, and even teachers never really noticed. When I left for a bigger job elsewhere, things fell apart immediately. Classes were double booked. Teachers were missing critical supplies. Parent complaints skyrocketed. The principal didn't know how to do basic paperwork. The school ended up losing accreditation for a semester, forcing students to transfer to other schools. Parents called me afterward, some in tears, asking why the school couldn't continue running like it used to. I tried to explain that I had been keeping the place afloat for years, but nobody had realized it. Watching the institution collapse after my departure was surreal. I wasn't trying to ruin it. It was just a system designed to fail without someone like me. I worked at a mid-sized law firm for almost 8 years, not as a partner but as the operations manager, the person who quietly made sure that everything didn't explode. I scheduled court appearances, managed deadlines, coordinated with clients, tracked case files, and basically acted as the glue holding the office together. Lawyers walked in, did their magic in court, and went home blissfully unaware of the chaos I prevented every single day. I loved my job in some strange masochistic way. But after 8 years of 60, 70-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and endless emergency emails, I finally decided to leave. I gave 2 months' notice and tried to train my replacement, but the partner who hired him didn't listen to any of my warnings, dismissing me with, "It'll be fine, it's all procedural stuff." I left. Within a week, things began to unravel. Court deadlines were missed. Filings went to the wrong judges, and client meetings were double booked. My old desk was a disaster zone of misplaced files and half-finished projects. Paralegals were panicked, calling each other in confusion. The new operations manager had no idea what he was doing and refused to ask for help because, as he claimed, he didn't want to be seen as incompetent. By week 3, clients were threatening to sue for negligence. A major case I had been overseeing as a coordinator was jeopardized because the new manager didn't file a critical document on time. The lead partner called me in desperation, asking for guidance, and I told him exactly what he already knew, that without someone who actually understood the system, the firm was falling apart. By week 6, the situation was catastrophic. The paralegals quit in waves. The new hire disappeared for a week without notice. The partners were frantic, trying to patch the gaps I had meticulously filled for years. One client even switched firms entirely, citing repeated administrative errors. The office. Once a smoothly running machine, looked like a battlefield. I stayed out of it, though I received panicked emails daily. "How did this happen? Why didn't anyone notice?" I thought of replying, "Because I was the one noticing. Now it's your turn." But I didn't. Watching the firm collapse without me was surreal, a mix of guilt, satisfaction, and vindication all at once. It's strange how invisible work often becomes completely obvious the second it disappears. I realized then that being the person everyone relies on doesn't make you indispensable until you leave, and sometimes leaving is the only way people see how fragile the whole system really was. And me, I took a new job at a smaller firm where my work was respected, my voice was heard, and I no longer felt like a ghost who held an entire office together while remaining unseen. The law firm eventually survived barely, but the lesson was clear. Never underestimate the person quietly holding the pieces together. I was the stage manager for a small community theater that put on a new play every 2 months. My responsibilities were enormous: scheduling rehearsals, coordinating actors, ensuring set changes were ready, managing costumes, and keeping the directors sane. Every single person involved relied on me, often without realizing it. I gave my notice quietly. I loved the theater, but after 5 years of sleepless nights, missed meals, and endless stress. I needed a break. Within a week, rehearsals went off the rails. Actors arrived late or not at all. Props were misplaced, and costume fittings were a mess. The director tried to micromanage but had no idea of the complex system I had maintained. Opening night was a disaster. Scenes were skipped, cues were missed, actors forgot lines, and audience members were confused. By the next production, half the original team had quit. I got texts from friends backstage. "We have no clue how you did this every time." It was strange, watching the world I held together crumble without me, but also satisfying in a quiet, I warned them kind of way.